Welcome to session 3 of the course. In this session, I want us to look at file servers. So we will create a very simple file server which is able to serve static contents. For example, PDF documents, CSS files, JavaScript files, and images. So what I want to do, since I want to sort of isolate this topic, I will make a copy of main.go. So cd tapot, okay, and I will say mv main.go, and I will let's cp, not mv, cp main.go, and I'm going to call this new version main.go.backup. Okay. All right. So we have both of them. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to use the backup to be what it previously was, and I will make changes to this main.go. Okay, so I hope you do the same. Be sure to look at the handout for session number 3, where I have a lot more comments that you can read. Okay, so we will keep package main, that's important. We will keep the two packages since we need both of them. And since we are not creating or using routes and calling functions on those routes, we will not be needing a function handler. Okay. All right. Of course, we will need a main. Okay, and we will need the actual web server. So we don't need handle func anymore, and we don't need this new serve mux. Okay. So we want to create a file server. So I'm going to create a file server. All right. And that's very easy to do. I'm going to create a name file server using shorthand notation. And we're going to use the HTTP that file server function. Okay. Now, this file server function requires an argument. Okay. Specifically, which directory it should look into to get the files. Okay. And so we will say HTTP that dir for directory, and I want it to look in the current directory. Okay, so it's going to look in the current directory, which I should put in double quotes. Okay. All right. So once I have my file server created, I now need, second step, I now need to pass this file server to the web server. So it's no longer mux. I'm going to say file server. Okay. Now, let's make things a bit interesting. Let's create a file that this file server can find. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to click here on tapot, right here, right? Okay, I'm going to right click. Right click. Yeah, well, actually, I just need to click here. New file. Let's call this index.html. Okay. And in this file, I'm going to quickly create a basic web page. So doc type HTML. All right. Of course, we need a head. Oops, head. All right, and let's simply have a title. Let's say Topot. Okay, and of course, after we have a head, we need a body. All right, and let's a paragraph says welcome to Darwin Lewis's web server. Okay, and let's create a footer. Okay, so I'm gonna create a footer. Right, and in this footer I want to create a link to my email address, so href say mail to dlewis at ub.edu.bc, and then of course we want the person to actually see my email address, dlewis at ub.edu.bc. Okay. All right. So we seem to be okay. All right. So this is my basic web page. All right. And so let me stop the web server. So Control C. Okay. Control L to clear. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to restart the web server, and I will navigate. I will come back to my page. Okay. And then I want to see what happens. Now I will say this. Sometimes when you have a page and let's say you make changes, you need to refresh the page. Okay. In other words, you might find out that you changed something, and when you check the web page, it doesn't show up. Chances are that the web browser is using the old copy, because remember, the web browser likes to cache stuff. So if you're using like a Windows computer, you simply say Control and F5, and that will clear the cache. Okay, that's just in case you ever find out that you're not seeing the changes. Okay. All right. So everything looks set. We have our file server. Okay, it's gonna look in the directory Topot. And by the way, it turns out that, and you'll see it. So let me just show you. Okay, let's run again. Okay, let's localhost. Oops, not there. Let's say localhost. Okay. So when I type the URL localhost with the port 4000, what shows up? Well, the index.html file shows up. Okay, and the reason why it shows up is because by default the file server has been programmed such that if it ever finds a file named index.html, it should display or render that file. Okay? It should render that file. Now, let's say I decide to rename this and call it index.txt. Okay, let me start my web server. Let me restart it. Let's see what happens. Let's refresh. Okay, and see there's no .html, no index.html file present, so nothing is rendered. In other words, no HTML is displayed. Instead, the file server will simply list all the files that are in the directory which I specified. And remember, I put a dot. The dot means the current directory. Okay, and that happens to be the tapat directory. And so it will list all the files. Alright, so keep that in mind, that whenever there is, and by the way, whenever we make changes, of course, we need to stop the web server and restart it so that it can notice the new changes. So let me revert to HTML. And so when I run my server again, and let's say I refresh, oops, not there, there, I get back the rendered index.html file. Okay, so the takeaway is we can create a file server, and the job of the file server is to serve static pages. Okay, so it's a good idea, and you will see that later on, that we will have a directory named static, where we'll keep all our files that do not change, right? Your image files and so on that do not change. We place them in a static directory, and of course you do that because you want to make sure you can write your web application so that it's easy to update. You don't want all your files in one directory. You want to have different subdirectories where you can have things ordered. Right? Okay, so that's it for session number 3. Right? We learned how to create a file server. Of course, you have to specify the directory where the file server should look to find those files. And of course, when we have a file server, we need to pass it to the web server so that the web server knows what to do. Okay, I'll see you in session number 4.